4 days after my husband's funeral, I went to the county courthouse to request a copy of his first marriage certificate. Peter had told me about Elizabeth on our second date. She was his first wife, the mother of his son Daniel, and according to Peter, she had died in a car accident 3 years before we met. For 24 years, I never had a reason to doubt him. The clerk searched twice, frowned at her computer, and finally said, "Mrs. Carter, your husband was never married before you." I actually laughed. "That's impossible. His wife died." The clerk turned the monitor slightly toward me. "There is no Elizabeth Carter, no marriage license, no divorce, no death certificate matching the information you gave me." I felt my stomach tighten. Then who gave birth to his son? The clerk looked at me for a moment and said, "I think that's the question you should be asking." That night I opened Peter's locked desk and found 23 years of payments to a woman named Rachel Carter. The final check had been written 9 days before he died. Across the memo line, Peter had written 5 words, "Please don't tell Daniel yet." I knew Rachel's name. I had met her once, 22 years earlier. Peter told me she was his dead wife's unstable sister. I was the person who called the police and had her removed from our front porch. I just didn't know that night I had helped my husband take a mother away from her own child. My name is Nora Carter. I was 51 when Peter died. He was 58. A brain aneurysm took him while he was standing in our kitchen, arguing with me about whether tomatoes belonged in the refrigerator. One second he was rolling his eyes at me. The next, the coffee mug fell from his hand. There was no goodbye, which meant I spent the first week after his death replaying our last stupid conversation instead of the 24 years that came before it. Peter had always been a protector. That was the quality everyone loved about him, and eventually I learned it was also his weakness. He believed protecting someone gave him the right to decide what they should know. If Daniel had trouble at school, Peter called the teacher before asking what happened. If I worried about money, he moved funds around before telling me. He solved first and explained later. Most of the time, it felt like love. I had never considered what it would look like when the problem he was protecting us from was the truth. I met Peter when I was 27. Daniel was 6. Peter told me Elizabeth had died in a highway accident outside Indianapolis when Daniel was 3. He spoke about her rarely and always with the same careful sadness. She was complicated, he once told me, but she loved Danny. There were no wedding photographs displayed in the house because Peter said looking at them upset Daniel. I never pushed. My weakness was that I liked stable things too much. Peter already had a house, a child, and a tragedy with a beginning and an end. I stepped into their lives believing the difficult chapter was behind them, which made me very willing not to reopen it. Daniel called me Nora for almost 2 years. Then one morning he had the flu and cried for me from his bedroom. "Mom?" he said without thinking. I sat beside him until he fell asleep and cried quietly into a towel because I didn't want Peter to see how much it meant. From then on, I never tried to replace Elizabeth, but I stopped pretending I wasn't raising her son. That was why the courthouse clerk's words felt obscene. If Elizabeth never existed, then whose child had I raised? The checks to Rachel Carter went back 23 years. Some were for $300. Others were for $900. One year, Peter sent nearly $14,000. The payments continued through college, Daniel's wedding, and the birth of his first child. Whatever Rachel had been to Peter, she had never gone away. I remembered her immediately. Daniel had been 8. Peter and I had been married less than a year. It was raining when someone began pounding on our front door. Peter looked through the window and went pale. "Take Daniel upstairs," he told me. I asked who it was. Elizabeth's sister. That was the first time I heard Rachel's name. She was thin, soaked from the rain, and furious. She kept saying, "I just want 5 minutes with him." Peter blocked the doorway. "You can't come here like this." Rachel saw me behind him and shouted, "Ask your husband what he did." Peter told me she blamed him for Elizabeth's death. He said Rachel had a history of drinking and disappearing, and that she had become obsessed with Daniel after losing her sister. Then Rachel shouted something I did not understand at the time. "You don't get to call yourself his father just because you had better lawyers." Peter shut the door. I asked what she meant. "Nothing." She kept pounding. Daniel came halfway down the stairs. Peter turned to me and said, "Call the police." So I did. I watched from the window as 2 officers placed Rachel in the back of a patrol car. She stared directly at me through the glass. I remember feeling sorry for her. I also remember feeling relieved when they drove away. For 22 years, Peter described that night as proof that keeping Rachel away had protected Daniel. Now I held a bank statement showing he had sent her $2,000 3 days later. Why would a grieving brother-in-law secretly pay the woman he claimed was dangerous? Daniel came over the next morning. He was 30 now, married, with a 4-year-old daughter named Molly. Losing Peter had reduced him to the little boy I remembered from the flu. His weakness was loyalty. Once Daniel loved someone, he defended them long after the evidence told him to stop. I showed him the courthouse search. He stared at the paper. That has to be wrong. I checked 3 counties. Dad said they got married in Kentucky. I checked Kentucky. Daniel stood up. So what are you saying? I don't know yet. No, you do. You think Dad lied. I wanted to soften it. Instead, I said, he did. Daniel left without looking at me. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where Peter had once told me Elizabeth was buried. I had never gone before. He said Daniel was too young to remember the funeral, and later refused to visit because it reopened things. There was an Elizabeth Carter listed in the cemetery directory. For 10 seconds, I thought I had solved everything. Then the groundskeeper showed me the marker. Elizabeth Carter, 1967-1992. No middle name, no family inscription, only 2 dates. I asked for the burial record. The groundskeeper disappeared into the office and returned looking confused. There's no burial. What? It's a memorial marker. No remains were ever interred here. Who bought it? He checked the file. Peter Carter, 6 months before he met me. My husband had purchased a grave for a woman who had never been buried, married, or legally existed. I drove home, convinced of the worst explanation I could imagine. Maybe Elizabeth had been real under another name. Maybe Peter had killed her. I found Rachel through the return address on the most recent check. She lived 2 hours away in a small yellow house with wind chimes on the porch. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before knocking. A woman in her late 50s opened the door. Time had changed her, but not enough. I recognized the eyes that had stared at me from the police car. She recognized me too. You finally found the checks. I froze. You knew I would. I knew Peter would die before he told you. There was no grief in her voice, only exhaustion. I followed her inside. The house was modest and painfully neat. On one wall were photographs of a younger Rachel. In several, Peter stood beside her. Not romantically, as children. Same Christmas tree, same parents, same last name. Peter told me you were Elizabeth's sister. Rachel gave a tired smile. There was no Elizabeth. Then who are you? She looked at me. I'm Peter's sister. I could not speak. And Daniel. Rachel's voice cracked for the first time. My son. The room seemed to tilt. Peter had not been Daniel's biological father. He was Daniel's uncle. And the woman I had helped police remove from our home was not a disturbed aunt. She was his mother. Rachel told me she became pregnant at 19. Daniel's father was a man named Scott, who disappeared before the birth. Rachel was young, angry, and using alcohol and pills heavily. Peter was 27, already established, already the responsible child in their family. For Daniel's first 3 years, Rachel moved in and out of their mother's house. Sometimes she was attentive for weeks, then she disappeared. I was a terrible mother, Rachel said before I could ask. You don't need to make me better than I was. That honesty stopped me. Her weakness was shame. Whenever she failed, she ran instead of staying long enough to repair anything. After Rachel was arrested for possession, Peter took temporary guardianship of Daniel. Rachel agreed. Temporary. That word mattered. Peter eventually petitioned for permanent adoption. Rachel was in treatment and missed 2 court dates. Their mother testified that Daniel needed stability. The adoption went through. Peter became Daniel's legal father. Then Rachel got sober and wanted her son back. You can't reverse an adoption because you regret it, I said. Rachel nodded. I know. So what did you expect Peter to do? Let me know, my child. That was harder to answer. Rachel showed me letters, dozens, some unopened, returned to sender. Others had Peter's handwriting on the envelopes. Rachel asked for supervised visits, phone calls, birthday cards, anything. Peter refused. At first, his reasons were understandable. Daniel had night terrors after Rachel's disappearances. He panicked whenever plans changed. Peter had finally created routine. Then Daniel started kindergarten. Children asked about his mother. Peter told the school Daniel's mother had died. What was he supposed to say? Rachel asked bitterly. His mother is alive, but I decided she's too dangerous to talk about? The lie was supposed to last until Daniel was older. Then Peter met me. I asked about Daniel's mother on our second date. Peter panicked. He gave the fictional woman a name, Elizabeth. He said she died. Then one lie needed another. A wedding, an accident, a grave. Why Carter? I whispered. Rachel looked toward the photographs. Our mother's middle name was Elizabeth. Peter had not invented a random woman. He built her from pieces of our family. A respectable dead wife was easier to explain than a living addicted sister whose son he had adopted. I felt physically sick. Did Daniel know? Rachel's expression changed. That depends which year you mean. I stared at her. She opened a drawer and removed a photograph. Daniel at 17. Rachel standing beside him. Peter was there too. Daniel had known something, just not what I thought. Daniel refused my calls for 2 days. On the third night, he arrived at my house and placed the photograph on the kitchen table. You talked to her? Yes. You had no right. The word stunned me. She's your mother. I know. I sat down. How long? Since I was 17. Peter had told Daniel part of the truth after Rachel threatened to contact him directly. He admitted Rachel was his biological mother. He admitted he had adopted him. But he changed one crucial piece. Peter told Daniel Rachel had voluntarily surrendered him because she wanted to start over. He said she returned only after learning Peter had money. He showed me checks, Daniel said, the same checks I had found. Peter described them as payments Rachel demanded to stay away. Rachel described them as money. Peter insisted she accept because guilt was easier for him than contact. What did she tell you when you met her? Daniel looked away. She said, Dad lied, and you believed him. He raised me. There it was. Not stupidity, loyalty. Daniel had met Rachel twice as a teenager. Both meetings ended badly. Rachel came in angry, determined to explain 20 years of pain in 20 minutes. Daniel asked why she had missed his 4th birthday. She became defensive. He asked why she signed the adoption papers. She blamed Peter, their mother, the courts, and finally herself. I wanted one person to blame, Daniel said. Dad gave me one, her. At 18, Daniel told Peter he never wanted to see Rachel again. Peter promised he wouldn't have to. Rachel stayed away. But she kept writing. Peter kept intercepting the letters. I asked Daniel why he never told me. His answer broke something in me. Dad said you'd leave if you knew. Peter had lied to protect Daniel. Then he lied to protect himself. Eventually he made everyone responsible for maintaining the world he invented, including his son. Rachel gave me one final box. Inside were birthday cards she had mailed Daniel over 20 years. Peter had kept them. He had never destroyed them. That detail somehow made everything worse. If he hated Rachel, burning the letters would have made sense. Keeping them meant he knew exactly what he was taking from Daniel. At the bottom was an envelope I recognized, blue paper, a cartoon airplane in the corner. I had seen it before. 22 years earlier, weeks after Rachel was arrested on our porch, Peter handed me a letter. He said it came from Rachel. He told me Daniel needed to hear it from someone gentle. I had sat on Daniel's bed and read it aloud. Dear Danny, I love you, but I need to live my own life now. Peter and Nora are your family. Please don't wait for me. Daniel cried into my chest. I told him his aunt loved him, but some people were too broken to stay. For years, I believed that conversation was the night Daniel finally accepted Elizabeth's family would no longer be part of his life. Rachel stared at the letter in my hand. I never wrote that. My knees almost gave out. Peter had written it. I had unknowingly told an 8-year-old boy that his own mother had chosen to leave him. I remembered every word I said afterward. You didn't do anything wrong. She made her choice. Sometimes adults leave because they can't be who we need. All of it built on a forgery. My husband had used my voice to make his lies sound loving. That was the first moment I truly hated him. Not for inventing Elizabeth, not even for lying to me, for making me participate without knowing. Then I found something written on the back of the fake letter. Peter's handwriting. Forgive me, he finally slept. That was Peter's entire tragedy in one sentence. He saw Daniel stop crying and convinced himself the lie had worked. Peter's attorney called the next morning. There was a sealed letter in his estate file addressed to me and Daniel. Peter had written it 6 months before his death. We read it together. Nora, Danny, there is no version of this where I am innocent. Peter admitted everything. Rachel had been unstable. She had frightened Daniel. She had broken promises. The adoption had probably saved his childhood. Then Peter wrote, but saving a child once does not give you ownership of his entire life. He admitted Rachel had been sober for nearly a year when she came to our porch. He knew she had completed treatment. He knew she had a job. He also knew a family counselor had recommended supervised contact. Peter refused. Why? Not because Rachel was still dangerous, because Daniel had started calling him Dad. I had spent 3 years becoming the person he ran to when he was scared. I told myself I was afraid Rachel would hurt him again. The uglier truth is that I was afraid he would love her again. Daniel stopped reading. I continued. Peter created Elizabeth because a dead mother could never compete with him. A dead mother could be remembered safely. She could not knock on the door. She could not recover. She could not ask for forgiveness. She could not tell Daniel that Peter had made choices too. Then came the part I expected least. Peter had tried to tell me the truth before our wedding. He had driven to my apartment carrying Daniel's adoption file. But that evening I showed him the small bedroom I had prepared for Daniel when he stayed over. There were dinosaur sheets on the bed, a night light, 3 library books. Peter wrote, "Nora looked at that room and said, 'He deserves a mother who stays.'" I knew she meant herself. I also knew if I told her the truth, she would ask questions I was too ashamed to answer. I remembered saying it. I had thought I was promising love. Peter heard permission to continue the lie. His final paragraph was addressed to Daniel. "I told you your mother died because I could not trust her. I kept telling you because eventually I could not trust myself. If you decide she does not belong in your life, let that be your decision. It should have been yours years ago." Daniel folded the letter. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I don't know if I can forgive him." I looked at the man I had helped raise. "You don't have to decide today." That was the first thing anyone in our family had said without deciding for him. Daniel met Rachel again 3 weeks later. I did not go. Neither did his wife. For once, nobody surrounded him with advice. They spent 2 hours together, then 4. The next meeting included Molly. Rachel cried so hard when her granddaughter called her Rachel instead of Grandma that she had to leave the room. They did not become a perfect family. Rachel still became defensive when Daniel asked painful questions. Daniel still used Peter's name like a shield whenever he felt guilty for liking her. Some wounds do not disappear because the truth arrives, but they finally belong to the right people. 6 months after Peter's death, Daniel and I went to the cemetery. We stood in front of Elizabeth Carter's empty grave. For 24 years, that stone had represented a woman I tried never to compete with. I had wondered whether Peter loved her more, whether Daniel wished she were alive instead of having me, whether some part of our family would always belong to a dead woman. Now I knew something stranger. Elizabeth had been built out of fear. Peter invented a wife because widowhood sounded nobler than taking his sister's child. Daniel needed a mother who could not disappoint him. I needed a past that did not threaten the future. Peter needed to believe protection and possession were different things. The lie gave all 3 of us what we wanted. That was why it survived. Daniel asked the cemetery to remove the marker. I thought he would destroy it. Instead, he took it home. Months later, he had the back engraved. Achel Carter, alive, not perfect, not erased. He placed the stone in his garden beneath a maple tree. When I saw it, I laughed. Then I cried. Peter's fictional wife had finally become useful for something true. I still love my husband. That sentence makes some people uncomfortable when they hear what he did. But love is not a verdict. Peter raised a frightened little boy when Rachel could not. He gave Daniel stability. He loved him enough to sacrifice years of his own life. Then he loved being needed so much that he could not surrender control when the danger passed. He was generous. He was loyal. He was manipulative. He was afraid. All of those things belonged to the same man. A year after his death, I found myself telling Molly about her grandfather. I almost said, "He always protected his family." Then I stopped. That sentence was too easy. Instead, I told her, "Your grandfather loved people very much. Sometimes he forgot that loving someone doesn't mean choosing for them." Molly was 4. She went back to coloring. Maybe she will understand someday. Maybe she won't. But I am done making the truth smaller because I'm afraid of what someone might do with it. Peter's first wife never existed, but the damage caused by pretending she did was very real, and so was the woman we erased to keep the story alive. The most dangerous family lies are often the ones built around a piece of truth. Rachel really was unstable once. Peter really did save Daniel from chaos. Nora really did become his mother in every way that daily love can make someone a parent. But none of those truths gave Peter the right to invent a dead woman, erase a living one, and decide forever which version of the past his family was allowed to know. Sometimes protection begins as love and slowly becomes control. The line between them is often crossed when we stop asking the person we claim to protect what they actually want. If you were Daniel, could you forgive Peter after learning that the man who raised you also erased your biological mother from your life? Do you think Peter was justified when Daniel was a child, but crossed the line once Rachel became stable? Or was inventing Elizabeth wrong from the beginning? And if you were Nora, could you still love your husband after discovering he used your own voice to help maintain the lie? Write what you would have done in the comments. What you would have done in the comments. What you would have done in the comments.